Hello and welcome to the Speaking Archaeologically lecture on Buddhist art and archaeology, understanding ancient Indian Buddhist sculptures. In this lecture, we shall be looking at some of the major sculptures from ancient India which pertain to Buddhism, and will study about the types of sculptures, the timeline of Indian sculptural history with respect to Buddhist sculptures, and the points to remember when studying religious images. Consider this lecture as a follow-up on object analysis. The only difference is it is targeted towards the study of Buddhist sculptures. Let us first begin by understanding types of sculptures. Regardless of their religious or social context, any kind of sculptures can be divided into two broad categories. The first among these is relief art sculptures. These include carvings on coins, motifs and nested sculptures in the walls, gateways or the railings of a monument, and continuous or monoscenic narrative scenes on monuments. If we have to understand these with examples, in case of Buddhist art, carvings on coins can be seen, for example, in the Kushan coins, where Buddha was a recurring motif. Nested sculptures in gateways or railings include floral motifs, the Shalabhanjika figurines, and the Darpandharini figurines that we've discussed in previous lectures. Continuous or monoscenic narrative scenes on monuments, specifically the stupas, include scenes pertaining to a particular jatak, such as the dream of Queen Maya or the birth of Buddha, the attack of Devdutt's hirelings on Buddha, scenes from the story of Nanda Sundari, or the very common scene of Buddha's Mahaparinirvana. So if I'm analyzing any of these sculptures using the techniques of object analysis, then I'm essentially studying a form of relief sculptures. Quite understandably then, the second type of sculptures that we have are the freestanding or the stand-alone sculptures. Obviously, as the name suggests, these were not a part of the railing or the main feature of the monument. They were rather independent idols which could be seated or standing on their own. Thus, most Bodhisattva and Buddha sculptures, which are much larger in dimensions, fall into this category. Having understood now the types of sculptures, let us look at the timeline of Buddhist Indian sculptures in ancient India. The first known sculptures overall in the Indian subcontinent are obviously known from the Indus Valley civilization and were generally made somewhere between 3300 BCE to 1700 BCE. These usually included the terracotta figurines and seals that are retrieved from various Indus Valley sites. The second phase of sculptures starts with the Hellenistic interaction. The Yaksh and Yakshini images and animal capitals in the Mauryan phase qualify as this category. Gradually, image worship traditions emerge around 72 CE with Buddhist sectional split into Mahayana. This happens under the Kushan Empire, and eventually the habit of making idols for worship trickles down from Buddhism to Jainism to Puranic Hinduism. Speaking specifically in terms of the Buddhist art, the Buddhist sculptures can be divided into Mauryan and post-Mauryan schools of art. Among these, the Mauryan schools include the Amravati school, which emerged in eastern Deccan area and dealt with beautification of caves. This was patronized earlier by Mauryas and eventually by Satavahanas and Ikshvakus. It flourished between the 2nd century BCE to 4th century CE and usually made use of marble for the creation of sculptures. The second Mauryan school is Sanchi school, which embellished railings and umbrellas around the stupas. But no human figurines were made in this particular school. Usually, this school and its works can be found centering the stupas of Sanchi, which are attributed to Emperor Ashok. In tandem with the doctrine of Hinayana school of Buddhists, no human depictions of Buddha are ever found in this school, although the Buddha Pad or the feet of Buddha is a common motif, and Buddha is also represented through various symbols such as lotus, the elephant, or the wheel. Yet another important school is the Bharhut school, which shows early aniconic phase of Buddhist art, where again Buddha is represented only through symbols. It is only between 50 BCE and 500 CE that the Gandhara school emerges, predominantly in what is known as the Greater Gandhara area. It must be borne in mind that this area is not synonymous with our modern-day geological and geographic understanding of Gandhara. Rather, it encompasses the entire area that you find after crossing the Paropamisides mountains, also known as the Hindu Kush. Historic Gandhar, therefore, included areas of modern-day northwest India, Pakistan, and southern Afghanistan. The art that developed here, showing Greek, Roman, and Persian influences, was known as Gandhara School of Art. Essentially, Hellenistic features tempered by Iranian and Scythian influences can be found in Gandhara School. The use of blue-black schist in early phases and stucco lime plaster in later phases marks the basic characteristics of Gandhara School of Art. The last most significant Buddhist school of art, which also lasted the longest, is the Mathura school. It originated in the 2nd century BCE and was fully developed by the 1st century BCE. It rose into prominence in the Kushana period and is known for making Buddhist, Hindu, Jain, and secular sculptures using red sandstone spotted with flecks of white. This school remained active almost all through the ancient period until the 5th to 6th century CE. Now that we've understood the types of sculptures as well as the sculptural timeline of Indian sculptures with respect to Buddhist art, let us look at the points to remember when studying religious images. Images or sculptures are ritual actors, more meaningful to the observing archaeologist than to a participant. Thus, there is a difference between the way the patron or the sculptor saw these objects and the world in which they were placed and the way we do. This difference cannot be cast as rational or non-rational. It is necessary, therefore, to bear in mind the indigenous mode of critical reflection and interpretation as an archaeologist. A religious image is a product of both conscious and unconscious strategies oriented towards satisfying material as well as symbolic interests. And these images appear as they do because of a determinate set of economic conditions. The archaeological anthropologist Bourdieu elucidates this point further in Outline of a Theory of Practice in his view on kinship. Religious images are often viewed in a conflicting light even by practicing followers. This is a point that needs to be remembered when looking at a religious sculpture. You must always remember that for a practicing follower, the sculpture you're studying may have been interpreted as a reminder of what he is worshipping, but at the very time, another worshipper might look at it as a presence of the figurine or presence of the divine. This makes it necessary for an archaeologist to refer to religious texts, standard texts, and to analyze the material evidence available. However, as Gregory Chopin reminds us, we must also remain free of literary bias of the standard text. Simply put, this means that you should not appeal to the text for clarification of the meaning of an image. The goal of visual art is to provide an insight into the mental landscape of the period that produced it. Thus, social and historical contexts are imperative to our study of iconography. While looking at the image or the sculpture before you, do take specific notice of the ornaments, the dress, the posture, and the gestures that your figure seems to be making. While mudras, seated and standing postures, or the main story in which the religious divinity is placed in a particular sculpture, is necessary for an archaeologist to translate using a traditional text. Also note that features such as anatomical descriptions, the names of the ornaments worn, the dressing style, as well as the condition of the sculpture are imperative to our understanding of who commissioned it and whether or not the commissioning agent was a person of economic prominence. Usually, lavishly decorated, heavily ornamented, and extremely well-carved images are a result of economic affluence. Just by looking at them, it can be deduced that it was commissioned by somebody in authority or a position of power. This is because ancient art, just like art today, followed the concept of you pay what you get, which means if you could afford that kind of mastery in craftsmanship, only then you would be able to make a sculpture which was truly magnificent to behold. Having described this in as many words, again, it's pertinent to remind you that you must always avoid woolly transculturalism and aesthetic sentimentality while describing a religious image. They are important, but remember that to an archaeologist, the context in which the sculpture is located is more important than the aesthetics of the sculpture. You must remember that unlike language, images are actors on a historical stage. What is signified depends on the context in which the image is situated. And if you are able to deduce that, then you may as well be able to deduce where the sculpture may be located in the broad architectural picture, what kind of dress culture, aesthetics, jewelry, or clothes were being worn at the time that the particular sculpture was being commissioned, and what the archaeological landscape looked like back then, specifically in terms of secular architecture, which can also be seen in certain figurines as a background relief. Consequently, studies on religious images, particularly Buddhist art, do not have to be limited to the features of Buddha, which is what was being done in the classical sense. A religious image, once properly adorned, becomes what it is taken to represent. It always depends on the context in which it is located, and it serves as an analytical tool and a rhetorical device. To an archaeologist, a religious image is always a mirror of history and a window beyond it. Thus, you're advised to go beyond the conventional understanding and the art historical analysis of the sculptures before you, and are highly encouraged to look into parallels, influences, and elements of other contemporary cultures which may have influenced the making of your sculpture. Don't limit yourself to looking at the central figurine represented itself. Try to look into flanking figures, ordinary people represented in the image, the architectural features and columns represented in the image, the demigods, their features and tales as represented by the image, and truly use your image to form an understanding of the past. We hope that this lecture has been useful in changing your understanding on how to understand sculptures from the past, particularly the Buddhist sculptures, with their myriad of motifs, their inclusions of elements from different forms of art developing in different regions, and the habit of incorporating the local artistic traditions into what they were trying to show.